This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Kimimaro is one of those characters that appears only for a couple of chapters and leaves a very lasting impression in the fandom. He was very cool looking, his design was great, and also his powers were so unorthodox, he even said it himself. His character was also not bad, and he came in a very good moment of the story, one of the best arcs in the entire series. The Sasuke retrieval arc. But then there's a question, how strong was this guy really? Who would be the most powerful opponents he could face against? Because if you think about it, when he fought against Lee and Gaara, he was essentially a dead man walking, moving through sheer willpower because he wanted to serve Orochimaru until the bitter end. But his disease was so far developed that he didn't have much time left. So much so that he actually died during the fight against Gaara because he just expired. So first we have to analyze, of course, the fights Kimimaro was in, how people analyze him as a fighter, and then his feats during the War Arc. Kimimaro's first display of power was when he managed to casually defeat an army of Naruto shadow clones enhanced by the QB chakra. The clones didn't have the Nine-Tails' chakra or anything like that, but they did have red eyes and slits for their pupils. So obviously this is not an unimpressive feat, because we see that even Naruto shadow clones in part 1 can be very powerful, swarming their opponent. And these clones were amped. Kimimaro just didn't even register them. We then get a better feeling for what Kimimaro can do against Rock Lee. Rock Lee arrives and fights Kimimaro in base at first, and Kimimaro seems to be pretty much above Rock Lee in that fight. Granted, Rock Lee was fresh out of the hospital, just out of surgery. They were pretty relative to each other, but it was clear that Kimimaro had the advantage. But then, of course, you have to take into account Lee's condition there. When Lee gets a little bit drunk and gets a massive amp, then of course he presses Kimimaro down, and Kimimaro has to resort to the first stage of his curse mark to actually combat Drunk Fist Lee. But still, Kimimaro manages to beat Drunk Lee with a bit of an amp from his curse mark, and then Gaara has to save him, and we know what happens in the fight against Gaara. Sure, Gaara was beating Kimimaro in Curse Mark 1, and he had absolutely no chance against him, but with Curse Mark 2, it was a different story. Kimimaro was powerful enough to punch through Gaara's sand and bypass his armor and shield just with sheer power. Gaara tried to bury him hundreds of meters down, and still Kimimaro managed to do that final jutsu, sprouting out a forest of bones from the sand and almost killing Gaara in the process had he not died and expired. So it's fair to say that Kimimaro actually won the fight against Gaara and Rock Lee. I mean, if he wasn't sick, he would have won at least. And just by the scale of the attacks used in that fight, Gaara was using sand tsunamis that were gigantic the size of the forest. Kimimaro was doing that insane bone jutsus with, well, his Curse Mark 2, and just completely altering the battlefield with him. That was probably the most high-level fight in the Sasuke retrieval arc, save for maybe Naruto vs Sasuke when they go Curse Mark 2 and QB Chakra Cloak. But even still, it's very debatable if Sasuke and Naruto would actually be able to beat Kimimaro. Sure, Kimimaro could probably not last very long against them, especially if they will go with their most powerful imps, but Sasuke and Naruto can't keep those imps for very long either. We also have to analyze how other characters treated Kimimaro. Kabuto, for instance, thought Kimimaro was by far the most powerful asset they had, and he thought it was a shame he was about to die, and so did Orochimaru, to be honest. He was supposed to be Orochimaru's next body, and of course Orochimaru didn't take him because he was dying of a disease. But the most interesting thing Orochimaru says about Kimimaro is that had he been healthier during the Konoha invasion, when Orochimaru was trying to kill the third Hokage, they would have been more successful. Orochimaru says that if Kimimaro was there, then killing Hiruzen would have been much smoother. And this is kind of a big deal. I mean, of course, Kimimaro couldn't solo Hiruzen. Even a healthy Kimimaro wouldn't even be close to do that. But Orochimaru implies that he would have wanted Kimimaro's help, his direct help, during the Hiruzen fight. The other members of the Sound 4 were used during that fight, but they were just there to use the barrier so that nobody could interrupt Hiruzen and Orochimaru. I'm not sure Kimimaro would have swayed the tides of battle that much as Orochimaru is saying there, but still, it's impressive that Orochimaru would even think that, implying he is at least Jonin level, if not higher. And then, well, of course he dies, but we see him one more time during the War Arc. Granted, he doesn't get a lot to do in the war. He was much more of a background character in the war, and Edo Tensei that was used to fight against the Alliance. But even though we didn't really see him that much on screen, what he did was not short of impressive, because he kept up with a KCM Naruto clone and he wasn't sealed. Kimimaro fought non-stop against the samurai army. Granted, he had help from Chiyo and a couple of other Edo Tensei, but he fought against an army. And then, of course, KCM1 Naruto shows up in every single battlefield of the war, and he helps sealing a dozen or so Edo Tensei, very powerful ones. Literal Kages, like the third Raikage, which a Naruto clone literally soloed, and then Mu, the second Tsuchikage, which Naruto kinda solo, but he had some help with Inoki and all that. And Kimimaro wasn't sealed during the War Arc. He was dispelled like many other Edo Tenseis when Itachi undid the jutsu when he defeated Kabuto. So maybe they just didn't have any means to seal Kimimaro because they were the samurai there, and also Naruto, they never showed any sealing jutsus as far as we can tell in that point of the story. And maybe Kimimaro just kinda outlasted them because the Edo Tensei can just regenerate forever, but that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems as though they were fighting kinda head to head there, and this is absolutely impressive because KCM1 Naruto is no joke. He was able to dodge the Raikage at full power, meaning he's extremely fast, and you know, Kimimaro in part 1 was relative to base Rock Lee fresh out of the hospital, which kind of implies that the Edo Tensei version was brought back as a more prime Kimimaro than the one who was about to die from his sickness, or maybe he didn't really have any limitations because with an immortal body the sickness wouldn't really be a thing, and therefore he could unleash everything he had. Even though it's a little bit nerfed by the Edo Tensei, he would still be more powerful than the sick version. Needless to say, he is probably very high Jonin level without his sickness, maybe low Kage level, who knows. Let's try to analyze this guy in terms of just strength and who he could beat. He could beat every single member of the Konoha 12 by the end of Naruto Shippuden. Granted, we don't know about Naruto and Sasuke, we're gonna get to them later, and also the 3 Sand siblings, except for Gaara when he is sick, but we see that if Kimimaro wasn't sick, he would have beaten Gaara. Naruto and Sasuke, maybe, if they use their highest amps in the Valley of the End, you know, they could beat Kimimaro, but I don't really see that, because Kimimaro can harden his skin with bone, and, well, I just think the Rasengan wouldn't do much to that. Maybe the Chidori could just pierce through it, but it's probably difficult. Now let's move on to the Jonins of the Leaf Village in part 1. Now, Kurenai, Kimimaru's got that one in the bag. I mean, we only see Kurenai fighting once in the series, and it's against Itachi, literally the worst opponent for her, but then again, Kimimaru's powerful. Now, maybe Kurenai can get him in a Genjutsu and win the fight, but in just a physical confrontation, Kimimaro would absolutely destroy her. Before we continue, I'd like to talk about today's sponsor, Squarespace, which is the best tool out there for you to create your own website. Squarespace makes the process of making your website much easier than you expect. You don't have to hire someone that knows code, you don't have to do anything like that, you just have to log in their website, and their tool allows you to create websites with professional quality. And the tools that are available to you are easy to use and very intuitive. They have several templates for you to choose from. You can customize your website exactly how you want. It doesn't matter what you want the website for. You can be a blogger, you can be an artist wanting to spread your art around the world, sell your things on the website, they can do all that stuff. So go to Squarespace right now and you can get a free trial for a month, and then when you're ready to launch your website, head to squarespace.com/Diagonite to get 10% off. Now let's get back to the video. There's also Asuma. I think this is a pretty difficult fight for Asuma, but maybe he can win with his wind style kunais and stuff. Maybe they can break through Kimimimaro's bones. Because that's the thing, his defense is too powerful. Now, his bones did break when he attacked Gaara's shield, amped by the minerals on the ground. They were the most resistant minerals. So there's an upper limit to that. Maybe this would mean that attacks like the Chidori and the Rasengan, when they're amped, and even Asuma's kunais will be able to pierce through his bone skin, but then again, Gaara crushed him with his sand coffin, for real, and the guy didn't flinch. Might Guy and Kakashi, they're different stories. They're much more powerful Jonin. Of course, they would beat Kimimaro, but Guy would have to use his gates in order to do so, and Kakashi would probably have to land a good Chidori. Now, there's also the outlasting way, but of course, we're trying to portray Kimimaro here in his prime when fighting against the Jonins and the Leaf Village, because, yeah, he wouldn't do very well in his 6th state. But because he was able to contend against KCM1 Naruto, he definitely has a chance to, you know, put up a fight here. I could even see him maybe beating Guy and Kakashi if he is in his prime. Now, of course, his body wouldn't be able to regenerate like the Edo Tensei body would in the War Arc, and that's maybe the reason why he was able to fight so much against KCM1 Naruto, but still, it's very impressive. But Guy is just extremely strong, and Kakashi has 1,000 jutsus he can pull from and a lot of strategy that he can implement. He would also be able to deduce Kimimimaro's abilities and the most effective way to counter them, so Kakashi and Guy, they do get that. Obviously, Kimimaro beats every single member of the Sound 4, but he doesn't beat, say, Hiruzen by himself, or Orochimaru, or Itachi, or Kisame when we talk about Part 1 antagonists. There's Haku and Zabuza, which are far more interesting in my opinion. I think he has a very interesting matchup against Haku, two very special KK Genkai users with a lot of talent that were cut short by circumstances of life. It would just be very interesting to see the ice versus the bones. But in the end of the day, Kimimaro would beat Haku. It would be an interesting fight, but not very interesting in terms of difficulty. Haku lost to an amped Naruto. You know, the Nine Tails chakra was definitely oozing out of his body there, and that's because, well, he was pissed. And he won the fight against Haku, but Kimimaro, yes, they were clones, but he casually destroyed 1,000 Naruto clones that were also amped by the QB chakra, and this is just a lot of difference here. And then there's Zabuza, and, well, Kimimaro probably wins this, but I think it's more difficult than Haku. Now, Zabuza says Haku's more powerful than I am, but I've always assumed he was meaning his talent and not his sheer strength. Still, Kimimaro has a pretty good chance here, because obviously Kakashi is stronger than Zabuza. When Kakashi gets serious in the bridge, he absolutely demolishes Zabuza, and Kimimaro would have the ability to absolutely negate Zabuza's attacks. I don't see him cutting through Kimimaro with his sword. The bones would simply tank it, so probably Kimimaro takes this one against Zabuza, actually. And now let's go to Naruto Shippuden. Now, when Sasuke returns, he is already much more powerful than Kimimaro was, so Kimimaro cannot beat any Sasuke version after the time skip. This is very obvious. But then there's other people that are interesting. Obviously, Kimimaro would beat post-time skip Sakura up until she gets the Byakugo ceiling. I don't see her beating Kimimaro in any way. And the other Konoha 11 members, I don't see them winning against Kimimaro up until the War Arc, at least. I mean, Kiba never wins against Kimimaro. And neither does Choji, Ino, Hinata. Shino probably has a good chance of winning in early Shippuden because his insects are just very hard to deal with. If they touch you, you're done. They absolutely drain you of your chakra. And I was going to say maybe Shino in part 1 could beat Kimimaro, but I think this would be a stretch. But Shino's insects, they're just very powerful. People don't get him enough credit. Shikamaru would also probably be able to beat Kimimaro just for sheer strategy and getting around his abilities, even though he would just probably be able to do that in the War Arc. And Neji and Lee would be able to beat Kimimaro by the War Arc as well, especially Lee, who's cutting Madara in half with a kick. Naruto doesn't really beat Kimimaro up until he gets Sage Mode. He definitely loses to Kimimaro right after the time skip, because he wouldn't be able to do much more, unless he goes, 4 tails, then of course he absolutely demolishes Kimimaro. But then again, even when he learns the Rasen Shuriken, that's a difficult jutsu to land, and maybe Kimimaro's bones can even tank that? Now that's probably a stretch, a very big stretch. If Naruto lands the Rasen Shuriken, Kimimaro's probably dead. But then again, how is he gonna land that? Maybe using the distraction he used against Kakuzu, but I never liked that fight. Like 4 clones is enough to distract a 90-year-old man. Kakuzu's 90 years old. He's one of the most experienced ninjas living. Maybe the most experienced ninja living. And he falls for 4 Naruto Shadow clones and gets Rasen Shurikened twice. Maybe Kimimaro would fall for them, but he didn't fall for 1,000 Naruto clones that were amped by the QB Chakra before, so I don't see him falling for 4 here. But then Sage Mode Naruto, I mean, he no-defs Kimimaro, obviously. Even though KCM1 Naruto had trouble with him, but, well, maybe that's because he was an Edo Tensei and didn't have a way to steal him. It's weird, we didn't see how that fight played out, so we cannot assume too much, just that, well, Kimimaro was able to hold his own. Chiyo would be able to beat Kimimaro with her 10 puppets, they're just too powerful. But now it's interesting to talk about the Akatsuki members and whether or not Kimimaro could beat any of them. Hidan, yes, absolutely, Kimimaro would destroy Hidan, no problem. Now you could say Hidan can extract Kimimaro's blood and just do the ritual, but then again, Kimimaro's better than him at taijutsu. And even if Hidan manages to strike him with his scythe, he can just bamf out his bones and use them as a shield. You know, those spiky protrusions that come out of his body and that just negate taijutsu attacks, he could just use that. And not even allow the scythe to touch his skin to draw blood, so yeah, Hidan is the weakest Akatsuki member. He would lose to Kimimaro. He lost to Asuma. Then there's Zetsu, and Zetsu's another one Kimimaro can take. Granted, Black Zetsu was able to contend against the Mizukage for a good while. You know, bone style, wood style, which one's better? I don't know. Because Zetsu's fodder, I'll give this one to Kimimaro because they like him better than Zetsu. Yes, I'm biased. And then we get to Kakuzu, another bottom tier in the Akatsuki strength list. And I think this is probably where the line is drawn. The most powerful opponent Kimimaro can probably take by his own. Would he be able to beat Kakuzu? I don't think so. Even if you consider Kimimaro in his prime, he would still have 5 hearts with an elemental transformation each to combat Kimimaro. Now, yes, he can use his jutsus to remain almost immune to attacks, but Kakuzu hits pretty hard. Eventually, Kimimaro would buckle. Maybe he would take out 1 or 2, maybe even 3 hearts if you go very deep into it, but I don't see him doing much more than that against Kakuzu. The other Akatsuki members wouldn't have a lot of trouble against Kimimaro. Obviously, the Kage would also beat him, the Sanin, and the other antagonists that come later in the story because they just get so much more powerful. But it's interesting that this guy was powerful enough for Kabuto to bring him back as an Edo Tensei. He wasn't just doing that with everyone. And he does have an interesting arc. Granted, it's kind of like Haku's arc. He was used as a tool by Orochimaru, completely brainwashed by him, and he couldn't escape his final curse, the curse of being in service to Orochimaru until he died. He thought Orochimaru was his hero. Well, kind of like Haku, because Haku also sacrificed his life to save Zabuza. And Kimimaro's sacrifice also worked to Orochimaru's favor, because Sasuke was able to get to him, and if Kimimaro hadn't arrived, In the Sasuke retrieval arc, then, it's very clear that the Leaf team would have brought Sasuke back. But let me know in the comments below, who do you think Kimimaro could have beaten in the story, the strongest opponent he could have faced and actually come out on top? Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, like this video because it really helps with the YouTube algorithm. Also, watch this other video right here, and thank you so much for watching.